This is a reaction video, if you like, to a video that went out from Ben at Crimson Guitars last week. He was with Matt from Workshop Heaven, and they were looking at the Scary Sharp system of sharpening, and I was very impressed, so much so that I went out and bought a whole load of goodies to try the system myself, and I'm still impressed, but having spent the whole of yesterday afternoon sharpening, having bought this system to save me time, I thought I'd give some observations about this system. I do think it's very good, but you have to bear in mind how to use it in order to get the best out of it. So what did I buy? I bought the basic kit, which is the glass plate, the strips of, the sheets of finishing film, micro finishing film, a non-slip mat. You can choose your level of honing guide, more on that in a second. You get some honing fluid, it comes in a metal tin. I've decanted some of it for ease of use, and I added in a roller because I don't have a roller, and this is a really useful item for getting the film to lie perfectly flat on the perfectly flat glass plate. Actually, contrary to what Matt says in the video, this isn't a tangent to the Earth's surface, this is the Earth's surface. So technically, this is a 6 million metre radius surface, but I wouldn't worry too much about that, because the difference between this and flat is less than the size of a bacterium. So yeah, let's not worry about that. To my mind, the most important thing is the honing guide. This is a Richard Kell number 2. There is a cheaper option, there is a smaller version of this, but I needed this to be able to deal with 2-inch plain blades. It's a beautiful piece of kit, and it is absolutely critical to the way this system works, because this system relies on you taking the minimum of material away from the blade. And in order to do that, you've got to be able to hold it accurately at a very precise angle against the strips of abrasive. And you can't do that with, for instance, my old Faithful brand. It's not particularly faithful. My old honing guide, because it wobbles like crazy. And a thing that makes this really bad for Waterstones is the wheel runs over the slurry. Oh, it isn't even rotating properly. Probably needs oiling. The wheel runs over the slurry that you're creating when you're sharpening, and you can't really get an accurate edge, not a square edge, using this. Whereas this, the rollers sit either side of the work as you're going along, and as you'll see in Ben and Matt's video, this also has the big advantage with plain blades, is you can put a camber on the blade by just dropping a wheel off the side of the paper. It's very, very subtle, but this system is about subtleties. Now, crucial to the working of this system is a well set up chisel or plain blade to begin with, and with that in mind, anticipating the extra work I was going to have to do, I also bought some 100 micron film, which I've got on the back of the plate here. This is not part of the basic kit, but was essential for my preparatory work, and this is pretty much what I spent the whole of yesterday afternoon doing, was setting things up. So let's look at some case studies to understand what's going on here. First of all, a tale of two planes. These are essentially the same plane. This is a Lie-Nielsen number 100. It's bevel up. The original plane that it's copying was bevel down. And this is a Stanley 101, which I've sort of converted into a 100 by adding this handle. And there's a video of me doing that. And this is actually bevel down. They've flipped the blade on this, and it's now bevel up. This is a beautifully engineered, well ground plain blade to begin with. It's lovely and square and even, and it had a perfect 25-degree bevel on it, and I don't know whether you can see that shining, but I've managed to put a small little secondary bevel on the end, and that took me a minute. It's just 1 or 2 strokes of each grade of finishing film, and then a little bit of finishing off on the back, just to make sure that we've got these 2 mirror surfaces joining, and that is now super sharp and very, very quick to do. This, however, took me more like half an hour to do. There was an awful bevel on it to begin with. Considering how steep this is, bevel down, I'm surprised that the bevel even worked on this. It was, I think, about a 40-degree bevel. I'm not sure what the angle on this is, but I'm surprised this ever worked with such a steep bevel on it. Of course, you can't put a 30-degree micro bevel on a 40-degree bevel, because you'll be sharpening the rear of the bevel, not the cutting edge. So the first thing I had to do was work this down to 25 degrees using the 100 micron, and then once I'd done that, I was then able to put my 30-degree bevel on the end of it and get a nice sharp blade. But the story doesn't end there, because this is not a parallel-sided blade. It's just subtly rustic. It's not even a consistent thickness, and plus the fact the frog, if you can call it that, in here, it isn't really very even, and the blade doesn't sit squarely in the plane. So what I had to do in the end was to mount this a slightly different way in the honing guide. Usually you mount it so that the underside of the blade, bevel up, is in the guide. You mount it like that, and you can just about get these blades in. There is enough blades sticking out to be able to sharpen these properly. But that is referencing the bevel to the underside of the blade. Meanwhile, the top of the blade is actually angled a little bit. It's thinner. I think it's thinner at this end, and this is the side that is sitting in the plane itself. So in the end, what I had to do was I had to mount it on the underside, which means it's trickier to get the right honing angle. The guide that comes with this doesn't have measurements for a blade mounted like this, but I was eventually able to get a blade with a slightly twisted bevel on it that would sit well within this plane and actually work. But that was quite a lot of work, mostly in getting the setup right. I now know that in future I've got to mount it this way, and I'm going to have a problem getting the angle right. I need to make some notes. I didn't make any notes at the time, I should have done. But in future, this will be almost as quick to sharpen as this. Whether or not I use this plane as much as this, maybe not, because obviously this is a beautiful, well-made modern plane, and I suspect will take the place of this. So those are the plane blades. Ultra fast to do, an absolute pain using this system. I could have done this a lot quicker by hand on Waterstones. A tip when using this honing guide: don't rely on this being finger tight. I think this is a 13mm, it's probably half an inch nut, but a 13mm spanner fits it. Yeah, it's probably half an inch. But make sure that that's cinched up really tight so that this doesn't move. Despite the unevenness of this blade, the fact that there are little nylon washers here with a little bit of give in them, it grips it quite well. Also, when you're honing, keep the pressure on the tip and just support the honing guide. Don't press on the blade. Normally it will be this way up, because I had to mount this upside down, but normally it's this way up, and if you're pressing here, the tendency is for this to shift in the honing guide if you've got a slightly uneven blade. If you keep the pressure on the tip, it means that there's less pressure here for the angle to change when it slips. So it's more that sort of action really. I'm being careful here, I'm on the glass, but this is sharp and I want it to stay sharp. But it's this sort of action, just keep pressure on the tip and don't press in the middle of the blade, and push it and shift it within the honing guide. Case study number 2 is this chisel, which I have now got sharp, all with the possible exception of the very tip of the corner of the blade up here. The problem with this is the back of the chisel had a nice concave here, which was a good thing, but then it came up and then dipped at the tip. The dip, unless somebody had used this to open a can of paint, I suspect the dip was created by me on my Waterstones by doing this sort of rocking action and taking material away from the tip at each side. If you carry on using Waterstones, I guess that gets you a sharp chisel, but for this system you want it flat. And go watch Ben and Matt's video, and you'll see Matt talk about this need for a concavity, so that when you place it on your 40 micron film on the other side, in this case I was using 100 micron to get it flat, then if you've got a concavity there, then when you're drawing the chisel back, you're only touching the tip, so it's quick and easy, and you're getting straight to the tip. When I was doing that, it wasn't touching the tip at all, and I had no choice really but to just keep working this and working this and working this to try and remove all of this material here, in order to get a flat surface that extends to the tip. I did put a concavity on it using the method that Matt shows in the video. I've got a thin strip of 40 micron here, and I was working it up and down this strip just to try and get this, remove this area here. But ultimately it was just hard work. It took me nearly an hour of just pulling this back, never go forwards, just pulling this back off the 100 micron sheet until I'd got this area flat. I'd had to take so much material away. You can see that I've actually removed part of the original concavity in the area here. I then put in a very subtle concavity using Matt's method, but it took me nearly an hour just to achieve that. The other side was a small problem in that the bevel was more than 25 degrees. It was nearly a 30-degree bevel. But I worked through a series of bevels, to be honest. I think this is still slightly curved. It starts out at 25 and then probably moves to 27, 28 near the tip. And then the final sharpening, I put a 30-degree secondary bevel on the very end. But I got there in the end. I'd like this ultimately to be completely 25 degrees before it gets to the secondary bevel, but I can work towards that over time. You have no choice but to just keep working it on the 100 micron until you've got that nice 25-degree bevel that you can then put a secondary bevel on. But you can't start out with a 30-degree bevel and put a 30-degree secondary bevel on that. That just doesn't work unless you're prepared to sharpen the whole of the end of the chisel, in which case this is going to take as long as it does with Waterstones. So that was a small problem, but not nearly as much as our next case study, which is this chisel here. This is my safe edge chisel. The edges have been rounded and polished so that I can use this for guitar braces, and if I do touch the front of the guitar, it's not going to dig in and mar the surface. Now this is sharp up to a point, pun intended, but the tip of this chisel, because it's only ever been sharpened by hand, I've ended up with a 41.3 degrees bevel at the very tip. Now the underside was quite well behaved. This has a little bit of a concavity in it, and so trying to flatten the underside, it was fairly straightforward. I'm getting to the tip and all is good. But on this side, I started trying to put a 25-degree bevel in this, and in the end I just gave up. I'd been working for over half an hour, and hopefully you can see that. That's about as far as I got. So I gave up on this. I could spend another hour on the 100 micron film in order to get my initial 25 degrees and then go back and do the sharpening, which is quick, I promise you, once you've got the chisel set up properly. But I gave up on this. Now I do have a little bench grinder which I can use, and that's obviously going to put a concavity on this bevel, which may be good enough, but I think even with the bench grinder I'd still have to come back here to at least get some of the grinding marks out of it and get something approximating 25 degrees before I proceeded. I might try this on my little disc sander just to see whether I can get 25 degrees that way, because at least then I'll know it's flat and accurate. Another issue with my bench grinder is I'm not sure how accurately I'd be able to put 25 degrees on the end there. So finally I'm going to do a bit of sharpening. This is not a tutorial video, but hopefully I can just demonstrate how quick this is on this chisel. This is a Christmas present. It's never been sharpened. This is out of the factory. There's quite a bit of burr on the end of the blade, but it is a reasonably accurate grind. This is more like 24 degrees than 25, but that's fine. There aren't too many grind marks, so I think we'll just go straight for a 30-degree bevel on the end of this. There is a little bit of setup work to do. The back is, I assume, completely flat, so we'll just work a very slight concavity into that using the method that Matt showed, and then we'll flip it over, having done the setup work, and see how quick we can put a good sharp edge on it. It looks like there is a very slight concavity on the back of this chisel, which is a good thing. You can see that it looks like there's been a little bit of finishing work on the tip, but the method that Matt shows in the video is a little bit of lapping fluid, honing fluid, on a 40 micron strip on the back of your glass plate, and right on the edge of the bench we just work the blade backwards and forwards, and that just rubs a little bit of material away from the middle of the blade and ensures that we have a basically concave surface on the back of the chisel. But I think it's already concave anyway, so I think I'm reasonably happy with that. We'll just go to the front and see how we get on with the actual sharpening itself. A little bit of honing fluid, and I'm just going to work the blade on the 40 micron film and just make sure that we are hitting the tip. Which we are. That's good. So just quickly, a little bit on each. So that's got a nice basic polish on the rear of the blade. So now we get our honing guide out and we put a secondary bevel on the front and get rid of this burr. For a 30-degree bevel I need 27 millimeters. That's close enough. Got plenty to play with on this because I've got such a low angle primary bevel on this. So that's now set that for 30 degrees. This could be interesting. I don't know whether you can see, but the chisel's at a very slight angle that way, which sets some challenges. Try as I may, I can't get this to sit squarely in the honing guide. The two sides of the chisel, even though they're parallel, this one tips in that way and this one moves out that way. So when you cinch it up tightly, the whole chisel twists. I'll carry on anyway and see what happens, but it does illustrate that this system works best with well-behaved chisels and plain blades. Let's see what happens. We're going to put a slight twist on the front of the chisel, but it's a small angle. Hopefully it isn't going to be a major no-no. Let's try it anyway. I'll work just the 50 micron to begin with and see what happens to the tip of the chisel. Yeah, it feels like just this corner's touching. Oh, and yeah. Let's, actually, I think we might be there. I'm just going to work that another couple of times. We are getting the bevel we want. I think I may have marked the film. Yeah, I think that may have been the corner digging in. But I think we have got the bevel we want, even though it's slightly uneven. As you can see, it's a slightly uneven bevel as expected, but it does extend the full width of the chisel, so I think we're okay. So let's carry on across the grits. And I think we're there. As expected, the bevel is a little bit skew-if, but that is a sharp chisel. Very sharp, and there's no burr there. So there we go. I hope you found this useful. It is an astonishingly quick system to use. It is literally just a couple of strokes on each grit, maybe a few extra strokes on the finer grits to make sure you got the scratches out from the previous level. But once you've got a well set up blade, that's the caveat, it needs to be well set up. It helps if there are perpendicular sides to your chisel so that it sits in the honing guide properly. But with modern precision tools, it is a very quick system to use. Maybe not so great with lumpy vintage chisels. Make your own mind up. Hope you found that useful. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!